All right, so it's Unified Presentation 5, and in this one we're looking at human-environment interaction, and then also we'll get into the EU and then the conflict in the Balkans. So first off, industrialization, we mentioned that a little bit in the history section, but basically, first off, Great Britain is the first one to industrialize. You need to know why. So even though they're an island, they don't have access to all the resources they would need to industrialize because of imperialism. They got access to everything they need and brought it into their country and industrialized first. Then after that, it went to the French and then the Germans and Italians and then eventually to the Americans as well. And then for Great Britain, one of their main resources is oil, which they get out of the North Sea. So they use a lot of offshore drilling in order to access that. And get it. Of course, it's harder to get to because of that, and also gas prices in Europe tend to be a lot higher, around $8 or $10 per gallon, and part of it's just because of their lack of access to oil. All right, the EU. So the EU basically started in 1957 as the EEC, then transitioned in '68 to the European Community, then '93 to the European Union. But overall, you need to know like why this happened at this particular time in history, and this all came about because of World War II, and really both the World Wars. They figured that by bringing the countries together, European countries together, they'd be able to avoid conflict in the future, which has definitely helped. But in '93, that's when the European Union, as we know it today, really started. And then soon after that, you see the introduction of the euro. So here's a map of all the countries that are part of the EU. Of course, the UK is on its way out, most likely, according to their vote. And you'll notice some countries that aren't in, like Norway, Switzerland always remains neutral, and then an area that we'll talk about here in a little bit, in the area of the Balkan Peninsula, where they had a huge conflict in the '90s, so they're not in the EU currently. All right, and here's different countries that have applied for EU citizenship. So some started straight up at the beginning. Turkey's negotiating and will never be a part, and so it's going to like basically forever be a part of it. I'll mention here why in a minute, why they're not going to get in. It's going to be a little bit, like 10 minutes. All right, and then Morocco, of course, was rejected from the get-go because Morocco's in Africa. They're not even part of Europe, so, I mean, what idiot would let them in? Yeah, Turkey's not going to get in either. I'll tell you why in a little bit. All right, currency, of course, you know it's the euro. The euro is worth more than the U.S. dollar right now. Yeah. And they transitioned to this in 1998. So, not throwing off my game now, all this stuff happening. Restart. Not restart the whole thing. That'd be stupid. All right, so the euro is the main currency in Europe. It's worth more than the dollar. That's basically what it looks like. You really don't need to know much about it other than the fact they use the euro. Now, there's some countries that don't use it, like Denmark, Britain, and Sweden, and they chose not to use it just simply because their money is worth more. And they didn't want to risk the euro not working when they transitioned. All right, and then the goals of the EU. This is really the main things you need to know. So first one's introduce European citizenship. So if you live in an EU country, you're a citizen of the EU, therefore you can move about from one country to another as you wish. And then develop Europe as the area of freedom, security, and justice. So basically that all the same freedoms are going to be there for all the people throughout Europe. And then, of course, security, be able to protect them from outside invasions or, of course, terrorism, things of that sort. And then maintain and build and establish EU law, protect people's rights in member countries. So this would be like civil rights. I gave the example in class about the woman that was wearing the cross in the UK and got fired because she was wearing a cross around her neck. So obviously the EU stepped in and allowed her to get her job back. All right, in this political cartoon, just showing Turkey trying to enter the EU. And you see the welcome mat and how it's got spikes all over it. And this just represents the fact that EU is not really open to Turkey, and you need to know why. So main reasons, first off, Turkey is more so culturally part of the Middle East. They're mainly Muslims. Their history is mainly tied into the Middle East, more so than it is part of Europe. And so culturally and historically, they just don't really connect with Europe. And also economically, they're poor. Compared to European countries that want to take them in. And then also you have political instability. We've had several terrorist attacks there this year alone. You also had an attempted coup where the military tried to take over the government. And so it's just not a very stable location at the moment. All right, more goals of the EU: promote economic and social progress. So basically help people earn enough money, make sure everyone's getting livable wages, that kind of thing, represent workers' rights. But one problem the EU does have is all the different languages they speak. So you have 20 official languages in the EU, and just to be able to communicate with each other costs $1.3 billion a year. So that's a lot of extra money to communicate, and that's coming from taxpayers. Now, obviously, they could just switch to one language and just all speak English and solve that problem. The positives about the EU, it allows people to move between countries, like I was saying. So you can move from France to Germany, and you don't have to, become a citizen of Germany. You're automatically allowed to vote, take part in elections if you wanted to, and then when you're traveling outside the EU, you can go to any embassy of any country you want that's part of the EU. And then looking back at the alliances, just to make sure you know the difference between the European Union and NATO. So European Union is an economic and political alliance and is only European countries, whereas in NATO is going to be a military alliance of North America and Western Europe, which was formed after World War II in response to the Warsaw Pact during the Cold War. And then looking at our partnership with the EU as far as trade between us and them, it's about $3 trillion of commercial sales every year. 40% of all the global trade is just us and the EU. It's 14 million jobs between us and them. And then 60% of the entire GDP of planet Earth just comes from our two regions. So two most powerful economies on Earth. All right, so population size, they're bigger than us. They have about 500 million. We're about 317 million now. We're a lot bigger than they are in land size. GDP, they're a little bit bigger. Today, we're currently around 18 to 19 trillion. EU is around 20, 21 trillion. Economic growth rate's around the same. Inflation rate is around the same. Unemployment just depends what country you're looking at. Some are higher than others. And then as far as Texas goes, we trade with the EU more than any state, so we do about $55 billion in business every year with them. And then California is the biggest seller of merchandise to the EU, which is going to be things from like the entertainment industry. All right, now let's transition. Look at the Balkan conflict. This occurred in an area that was known as Yugoslavia that broke up at the beginning of the 1990s. So this area today is Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo, Macedonia. All right, so this political cartoon is just showing kind of the history of the Balkans and just making fun of the fact that they've always been fighting. Nothing has really changed there. They've always been fighting, and that as far as their civilization goes, they're still kind of barbaric. All right, so a short history of the Balkans. You go back to the 500s. You have the Slavic people from Northern Europe, like Poland region, migrate down south into the Balkans region. So ethnically speaking, all these people are the same, whether they're Croats, Slovenes, Serbs, whatever, they're all Slavic. And then fast forward, they were overtaken by the Ottoman Empire in 1389. The Ottomans are Muslims, so they move in, take over this region, and treat them brutally. And then, of course, they're obviously going to want to get independence from them, and the people that don't convert to Islam are going to want to take it out on the Muslims when they get a chance. And then you fast forward the 1800s, Bosnia and Croatia, they've become part of Austria-Hungary, and then Serbia allies with Russia. And so this whole region really is controlled by three different empires or countries: the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Russians. All right, then you fast forward to right after World War II, you get Tito takes over, Joseph Tito, and he unified all these republics together to form a country called Yugoslavia. But since all these people hated each other and wanted to fight each other, you have to be like a really brutal dictator to control them. And so he's the kind of person that if you mess with him, he kills you and your family and like drags your bodies in the streets and stuff like that. Just a really horrible guy. And then Yugoslavia disappeared in 1991. With the fall of the Soviet Union, so did Yugoslavia. And then all these countries, or places that were once independent countries, began declaring independence on their own, like Slovenia and Croatia. And this is going to lead to a big war. So as far as the fighting goes, there's not an ethnic difference between these people. So they're all the same people, all Slavic people. So the difference is mainly is nationalism is the main force here that's really controlling everything. And then religion, and then anger over past conflicts. Things that happened 1,000 years ago, they're still upset about. So the main religion in this area is Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Muslims. Now, of course, the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox could get along some because they're both Christian. But of course, the Muslims would be the ones that are targeted the most. And then as far as how it gets divided, so people in Croatia are generally Roman Catholic, most likely because of their proximity to Italy. The Serbs are Eastern Orthodox because they're closer to Greece. Bosnian Muslims, and this is where it gets weird, Bosnian Muslims are Serbs who converted to Islam during the 5 centuries of Turkish rule. So Bosnian Muslims are Serbs ethnically that live in Serbia, but they converted to Islam while the Ottoman Empire controlled them. And then Bosnian Serbs are Serbians that did not convert to Islam, but they don't live in Serbia anymore. So the Bosnian Serbs are Eastern Orthodox, but they don't live in Serbia. So they're all the same people. It's just a matter of where they live and what religion they are. And then Albanians, Kosovars, they're Muslims. And then your former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia, they're Greek Orthodox because they're right next to Greece. So they're going to take on theirs. All right, let's fast forward a little bit. All right, so again, nationalism is the main driving force. And just to get an idea of what nationalism is, it's beyond patriotism. So patriotism is just a pride in your country and like willing to fight for it and stuff like that, but you think everyone else in the world's cool too. Whereas in nationalism, you think you're the best and everyone else sucks and you can enslave other people or kill them or whatever, it doesn't matter, as long as your people are on top. And this, of course, is going to lead to some pretty crazy fighting. This also led to World War I, to give you an example of what this can do. So Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was the heir to the throne to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Serbs were tired of them and wanted them out of their country. And so an 18-year-old assassinated Franz Ferdinand in the street during a parade, basically. And that led to World War I because Serbia was supported by Russia. And then Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And so Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. And then Germany is an ally of Austria-Hungary. So then Germany declares war on Russia, and then Russia on Germany. And then France and Great Britain are allies of Russia, so they declare war on Germany and Austria-Hungary, and then vice versa. And then you go down the rabbit hole to death. All right, and then you get to, finally, the early 90s. So at this point, Croatia and Slovenia declare independence, and then you got one guy that wants to be like Josip Tito. He wants to unify it all together again. So he leads the Yugoslav National Army under Slobodan Milosevic, and he is really just on a campaign to be a dictator, to take it all over. And he also leads a genocide while in power. So as far as who's fighting who, really the most important one on here you need to know is the last bullet point. And you'll also notice one group that's getting attacked the most. So you got Serbs killing Croats and Bosnian Muslims, and then the Croats killing Serbs and Bosnian Muslims. Bosnian Serbs killing Croats and Bosnian Muslims. So you can see the Bosnian Muslims are kind of getting the short end of the stick here. And then the Bosnian Muslims are having to fight back because everyone's killing them. And then the Serbs attack Kosovo's ethnic Albanians, and that's your genocide. So the Albanians are also Muslims, but they were chosen for extermination. And it was just killing them in the streets and piling their bodies up in the streets. It wasn't like gas chambers or anything like that. And then you get to 1995, the Dayton Peace Accords that were signed in Dayton, Ohio, of all places. And this technically ended the war, but you still had a lot of fighting in Bosnia through the late 90s and year 2000. So we were still involved at that point, mainly through air power. So we did a lot of bombing runs in Bosnia during this time. And then Milosevic, we arrested him in the year 2000, put him on trial for war crimes against humanity, where he was sentenced to death, but he died of natural causes, maybe, in 2006, or he was poisoned. And that's it for this presentation. So really the big idea for this one is just understanding what happens when you have regional cooperation, which the EU is the example of that, and then what happens when you don't have regional cooperation, and the Balkans is the example of that one, when countries don't work together and don't figure out solutions to their problems.